Well, I'd really like to welcome Tony MacDonald from the Urban Coastal Institute to our conversation this afternoon. Welcome, Tony.
Thank you, President Brown. It's nice to be here.
I really have to start with just asking how you found your way to Monmouth University and to the directorship of our Urban Coastal Institute. I'd love to hear a bit about your background.
Great, appreciate it. It's really actually a kind of a coming home for me, because I actually grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, which is northern Jersey, and my family always had a house in Avon, which is just south of here. So, and my dad still lives here. So it was really nice. I had worked in New York for my early career and worked a lot on issues that are still important to this region, including ocean dumping. And then I took a little detour. I was in Washington for 18 years, originally working for Mayor Koch. And then this opportunity came up. I had been doing mostly lobbying for Congress, and the opportunity came up you had just started up the Urban Coast Institute here at Monmouth, and they were looking for a director, and it really was a great opportunity for me. It fit in with my experience, and also a place that I loved and knew from growing up.
I'm sure those 18 years in Washington have served you pretty well in this role here, too, given how we're so intricately involved with all the decisions that we have to be made in the broad area of Coastal Institute issues. A more immediate set of conversations I'd love to hear you talk about is obviously one is we're almost 1 year from Superstorm Sandy. How do you see the Urban Coastal Institute? What role did it play in the immediacy and then maybe in the longer term?
Well, it really, the thing about Sandy, it really reminded us that there was some work that we were already doing, and we were really fortunate to actually have been working with the communities already. We had gotten a small grant, actually, from the National Sea Grant Consortium to develop a kind of vulnerability analysis for communities to look at sea level rise and storm damage. And also kind of where we fit, the Urban Coast Institute fits in is the policy arena. So we really want to make sure that the communities have the best science to make the best policy decisions. So we had developed a getting to resilience kind of criteria for towns to do a self-analysis. So fortunately, we had some tools we had already developed. So after Sandy, we've stepped up a little bit, and actually we're doing more extensive outreach to communities. It also has meant that the Urban Coast Institute can work with the university at large. There's a lot going on at the university. You know better than I probably, because you're involved with all, but we work with the Kizak Real Estate Institute on development issues having to do with Sandy. We work with the Polling Institute, who's been doing, before this, had been working with the UCI to do some polling about people's views about coastal management. And increasingly, we're working with other departments as well. So what Sandy did is not only galvanize the UCI, but I think the university at large to really figure out ways that we can bring the expertise at the university out into the communities.
That's great. I also have a sense, as I think many of us do, we're torn with thinking the immediacy of how there's still many folks, individuals in the area that are struggling with a year later in terms of the devastation. But then we're also trying to learn what does it say to us in the next year and the next year and the 10 years and the 30 years from now, and how many more Superstorm Sandys do we have to sustain? That whole area of long-term view of everything that's related to, particularly a little bias towards right here on the coast, why we're called the UCI. Right. What do you see, and what did we learn, and what do you see long-term here?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we're exactly trying to tee it up that way. As you know, in October, at the 1 year anniversary, we had a major event where over 500 people here asking exactly that question, looking forward. What do we do? There's a lot of people responding right now to recovery, which is very challenging. But I do think we need to think of some issues about what do we do long term. We do significant beach nourishment along the Jersey Shore that the Corps of Engineers pay for. Can we pay for that into the long term? And is that going to be enough to protect our coastal communities? We found a lot as a result of Sandy that we really weren't ready for, particularly around back bay flooding issues. So how do we work with communities on actually developing new ways of developing their property, or in some cases, you know, we want the communities to be strong economically, but we might not be able to rebuild everywhere exactly the way we did in the past. So as we rebuild, we're looking at innovative ways where maybe communities could actually adopt some best practices that we can bring to the table from other regions of the country or other areas that have responded to storms. So I think that's some ways that we can look at that. And I also, frankly, think continuing education. I mean, we just continually can work with the students, actually, who have been very actively. You were up in Union Beach with some of the students doing some of the rebuilding work. And I think the more you get students involved in the community recovery, the more they'll be asking questions and learning things that they can apply in the future as well.
You mentioned particularly benchmarking. Every situation I guess to some degree is unique, but what did we learn here, and how have we benchmarked with other areas within the United States and the world from this particular storm, and what might be long-term issues we need to address?
Well, I think this was well known in the academic community and the research community that this is an area uniquely at risk because we have so much intense development on the coastlines. People knew that in the academic community, but you forget storm to storm. They haven't historically happened that often. But there's two big changes. One is I think we realize, I think the community from New York City on down recognizes how much is now at risk as a result of Sandy. And the other story, we'll debate climate change, what are the causes of climate change, but everybody knows that climate is changing regardless what the reasons are. And I do think there is a sense that storms might be more intense and more regular in the future. So I think there is an added degree of kind of diligence that hopefully we'll get as a result of the storm.
I guess we're trying to skirt a bit the climate change conversation, but I'd love to hear your views.
Well, again, there's a couple of things. I think there's absolutely no doubt that, in fact, humans have added, and the industrial development have added to CO2 in unprecedented levels. And that has had an impact on climate, and it's changing. The issue is over large expanses of time. Is it the only factor? And that can continue to be discussed. But I think there is a consensus that there's going to be climate change. There is a consensus that there will be impacts. We have ocean acidification, which is happening because the pH level, the CO2 is impacting that. We have sea level rise. We have that historically, and we know we're going to have more. How much? We don't know exactly, but we know. We know, in fact, that all the scientists, or the majority of the scientists, predict more intense storms. So those are three things we know we have to adapt to. So from my perspective, I know that we can help communities understand better how they can adapt to those changes and hopefully take progressive action to mitigate them too. So how can we? It might not be everything, but what we have control over, we should take control over and try to take some actions.
Well, it makes me also think, and you said this several times, I do believe a sweet spot here at Monmouth is having applied research that our students can be engaged in. We have lots of institutes that help do that, and I believe UCI is one of those. I'd love to hear some examples of how our students have gotten their hands wet or dirty in projects.
Well, we've been very fortunate. We've gotten some funding from a variety of different sources, from EPA, from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and also from some private donors and the Fairleigh Dickinson Jr. Foundation to build an infrastructure. So we've been able to buy some research vessels and some very sophisticated equipment to do monitoring of the waters, to do hydrographic surveying. So we have better data, and we're working with communities up in Shrewsbury River and Navesink River to actually do a storm surge model so that they can actually predict that. But you need the baseline data, and we can do that with our hydrographer. We have a wonderful marine scientist, Jim Nichols, who takes students out to do this work. So we're not only supporting the communities, but we're getting students involved in that. In addition, we have a whole network of water quality monitoring stations. Sometimes people, in good times, they forget that they actually have to monitor the science and keep a track record of what happened. If you don't know your current conditions, you can't respond properly. But fortunately, with this water quality monitoring stations, we can actually monitor the impacts of the storms on the water quality in different areas. And obviously in New Jersey, with beaches and how much that's important to the economy, we really need that information. And again, at the same time, we're teaching kids to use this equipment, so they're getting the technical skills as well as the science behind the research.
What would be an example of a finding for a layman that you can relate to in a water quality station that a student would have found and shared and celebrated in their research efforts?
Well, we found, for example, there was a time before you got here where actually some dolphins had come back into the Back Bay in the Navesink. So we're able to sort of track a little bit sort of what maybe the temperature was in the water. So how could you actually predict, and what was the reasons that some of the dolphins came into the estuaries. In addition, if you can map over time the changes in nutrient levels, that informs management decisions. So you can say, how do you actually control the input of nitrogen? A big issue in this state is nitrogen input into the waters, but you need to know what the baseline conditions are in order to know whether the actions you take are going to be effective. So that's why you need long-term monitoring. So we take that data, we then provide it to the communities, to New Jersey DEP. It goes into their data sets, and then they can choose different strategies to try to control the nutrients going into the waterways.
Sounds like an expensive proposition to me. Is there expensive instrumentation involved here, and vessels, and training, and background, and databases?
Well, databases, we can manage it. It's not expensive compared to the benefits that it generates. So we really significantly generate, when you look at what the coastal economy generates, it's certainly not an expensive investment. And actually scientists for a long time have been trying to argue you need to invest in the science if you want to get the economic benefits. And they have been sometimes more successful than others. So definitely the payoff is there. Again, we've had, fortunately, these research grants that enable us to buy the vessels. Now that we have them, we are able to maintain them. We actually have a vessel account fund that we're actually trying to maintain that for the future so that we can replace the vessel eventually. Again, with the monitoring stations, they've been a little expensive. We're actually looking for corporate sponsors. So there are corporate sponsorship opportunities where we're looking. We've had at least one alumni who's adopted one of our water quality monitoring stations, and that helps significantly. But we're also continually looking for grant opportunities as well to help support the research work.
Tell me about one of these vessels. I mean, let's get detailed. What's the size of one of these vessels? And
well, again, that's why I have a marine scientist. I'm the lawyer on staff here, President Brown. But we have vessels, actually, I think there's a 27-foot vessel that we have. And again, we have on it sophisticated hydrographic surveying, a side-scan sonar that can map. We actually used it in sandy debris management. We've taken it out to actually help the state identify where some of the debris from Sandy is. We were a subcontractor to the state to work on that. And again, I will defer to Jim on the details of the technology. So I don't.
Well, what's great about what you're describing is a student who comes here studying in any of the broad areas of marine biology, ecosystems, sustainability, environmental, broadly defined. We really have a set of programs, and obviously you need the talent and the expertise, and actually the infrastructure to be able to pull it off. It sounds like that's where you might like to go. If you closed your eyes, where would you like to see the UCI go in terms of next projects, next activities?
Well, I see three different core areas of focus for us, although we're here to serve the community and serve the students. But we will continue, as a result of having this capacity now, we've developed a field methods course that Jim Nichols teaches. So increasingly we're developing not only supporting the other classes to take them out on research excursions, but also the actual field methods themselves. I'd like to see that increase, as well as increasing. We currently, with some funding, we have what's called the Heidi Lynn Sculthorpe Summer Research Grant Program. So we have a summer research program here, and we increasingly would like to attract more resources to do summer research using our equipment, as well as getting students out into the field. So I think that's an area, building, as I said, our niche on the research area is along the shoreline. I think that's great. But we're also doing, my background is ocean policy and planning. So we also have a major grant from NOAA to actually develop an ocean marine data portal. So in addition to the coastal issues, which are prominent and in the newspaper, we have things like proposals for offshore wind energy facilities. I just came from a meeting in New York with the port industry, and they're concerned about increased demands post-Panama Canal expansion for increased traffic. How do we manage all of these uses well into the future? So we also would like to continue to stay involved in ocean planning work. I'm very fortunate, thankfully, to you. You appointed former President Emeritus Gaffney as an Ocean Policy Fellow. So we're continuing to work with President Gaffney, and he was a member of the Ocean Commission, the U.S. Ocean Commission, to look at some of those ocean policy issues in the region. So that, I think, is an area for growth as well. And lastly is, as we started off on the Sandy, the community resilience. How do we continue to work with our local communities to develop resilience to storm, but also hazard to sustainable development? That's something that we have a minor, as you know, in global sustainability. So we also see that continuing role as well.
Yes. I can't help but say, Tony, I'm impressed by, in one set of words, you can make it very clear that the issues of the day we're addressing are as local, importantly, as our Shrewsbury River or close bays. They're as broad as the inner ocean. They're as broad as Panama, and they're as broad as world issues. I believe you tie it all seamlessly together in your mind.
I appreciate that. And actually, it was one of the reasons that attracted me here. I'd worked on a lot of national and international level policy issues in Washington. but the ability to stand on the shoreline and a place where it actually is happening day to day. And you know, I like to say the ocean is the front door to the rest of the world.
Sure.
And so even though it's right here, it really is, I think, an opportunity for the students in the university to actually engage locally in ways that are nationally and hopefully in some cases even internationally significant.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for spending time with me this afternoon.
Pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome.